As Steve mentioned, I'm with Suite Solutions. Briefly, our vision as a professional service company is to enable companies like yours to engage your customers by providing quick access to relevant information. That's kind of a mouthful, but if we think about what we're all trying to do, when we're talking about XML, we're talking about DITA. And at the end of the day, the idea is not to do XML, and the idea is not to do fancy style sheets, but the idea at the end of the day is to allow your customers to get relevant information and to allow them to do their jobs quickly. And XML and DITA and dynamic publishing, that's the way we're going to get there. We're a consultancy, systems integration company. We have some platforms for delivery of content, which we'll talk about briefly. So you should be seeing a slide called Main Topics. First, we're going to talk about, when we talk about dynamic publishing, we're going to talk about the magic button, getting that high-quality localized output from DITA. We're going to talk about common requirements that we see often from our customers for their outputs, localization considerations. We'll talk about some advanced use cases, pushing the envelope. We'll talk about some dynamic publishing platforms, and all throughout the presentation, I'm going to pepper the slides with case studies and allow you to kind of see and real life some examples. So we have a lot to get through, but I hope that we'll get through it and have some time for some questions at the end. So the first question is, what is dynamic publishing? So dynamic publishing is, up until recently, was the word or the term for the highest level of publishing. If we're talking about DITA, and DITA being Darwin, so dynamic publishing is kind of like the highest animal on the food chain. It's meant to be a platform that allows easy access to relevant information, harnessing business rules, leveraging automation to put together lots of content on demand according to each individual and what's useful for them, and then packaging that content on the fly to whatever device, format, and language that they need. Nowadays, though, because not so many companies know how to do that, so dynamic publishing, for better and for worse, probably worse, is kind of becoming the latest buzzwords for single-source, multi-purpose, automated publishing that we've been hearing about for a while. So what I'm going to do is focus mostly on the last definition, okay? Because when we advertise the webinar, we're talking about how to get high-quality formatted output from DITA. So we're going to give you a lot of examples of that, and then we're also going to show you what I think is the real thing, some real dynamic publishing on the fly type of platforms. So let's talk about the magic button. So there are some common misconceptions about DITA, which we're going to try to dispel today, for those of you who are already convinced. So first of all, what we hear often when I go into training sessions is when either colleagues are considering DITA or the authors are in their first training course and they're kind of squirming in their seats and asking themselves, why do I have to do all this? And so one of the complaints we hear about the publishing is that, well, DITA can't really match the quality and the complexity of our desktop publishing now, whether we're using FrameMaker or InDesign, and therefore we're just going to have to compromise, okay? Or, people don't like the loss of control over those final output, those tweaks that people like to do, especially those page breaks. But the reality is that anything that we've seen, and we've been doing this for as Suite Solutions for about 7 years, and I've been doing this for a long time before that, anything we've seen that's come through us and said, listen, we want to produce a certain type of output, we've been able to do using DITA. Sometimes it's very easy, and sometimes it's a little bit more challenging. Sometimes there are things you would think that are very challenging but are actually very easy, and sometimes the opposite is true. Sometimes there are things that seem should be easy, but they're a little bit more challenging. In any case, the point is that whatever you can get in your desktop publishing now, you're highly likely 99.9% chance to get it in DITA and XML automated publishing as well. So the style sheets, the piece of software that turns your DITA into an output, can be customized, parameterized, and localized. So that CMS, for example, Easy DITA, is plus those style sheets installed on the CMS gives you that magic button in any format, in any language that you need for any device. Well, it's not so easy at first. It takes some effort to set it all up and to think about what you actually need. and that's what we're going to be talking about a little bit today. Okay, you should be seeing a slide that says multi-purpose publishing. Steve, if you're not seeing that or there's a delay, please let me know. So multi-purpose publishing basically means a number of things. One is to reuse topics in multiple publications. That's the basics of reuse. I make topics in little Lego blocks, and I can reuse them anywhere I want, multiple times. Topics can appear differently depending on where they are in the map hierarchy. So if I have a map that has a hierarchy of a publication, so a topic can have a level 1 heading in one publication, but in another publication it might be a level 2 or level 3 heading, and that topic can look different, or very often will look different depending on where it is. For example, the heading would be a different font size or a different color maybe. Okay. Single source means many outputs, whether it be PDF. Okay, and the PDF is a three-letter word, three-letter acronym, but there's lots of different types of PDFs. There's high-fidelity PDFs that you're using for print or for brochures versus PDFs that are created for online use, which should be much lighter and easier to download. There are manuals, which are maybe larger types of publications with table of contents, list of illustrations, etc., as opposed to data sheets, which are maybe 2 or 3 or maybe 10 or 15 pages, but they're relatively small. There are fold-outs, which is a PDF that's meant to be printed and folded, put into a box. And there are labels, making PDFs where you can peel off a label and put it onto a bottle. Okay, so PDF it means a lot of different things, but it basically means for print, okay, or for online viewing in a way that looks like a print. There's help. For example, HTML help, our old friend. There's web help, different flavors. HTML5, that's the new buzzword for HTML these days, which gives a lot of different advantages. Websites, knowledge bases, man pages even, etc. There's mobile. These days we're talking about EPUB, Mobi, Nook, all those ebook readers. Mobile also means feeding native apps with content, meaning taking your data content and channeling that through whatever application you have to be viewed on the device, or responsive design websites, for example. Single source also means channeling back to InDesign. We see a lot of people who are taking their content, moving it into DITA, and now saying, well, I'd like to be able to use this content for high fidelity brochures, or I want to be able to send this back to my production department and have them do some tweaking or something from a high level brochure point of view. So people are talking about moving back to InDesign, and we've done some implementations of that. Moving back to Word and publishing to Word, and then integrations with other systems are becoming more and more requested. Integrations with Salesforce, taking data content, knowledge-based articles, and pumping them into Salesforce Desk. There's Zendesk, which is a customer service application, SAP, which can be used for ERP or for product lifecycle management. So when we say single source, many outputs, dynamic publishing, it really means taking your data, your text files, your XML, and then publishing it into multiple outputs. And then there's the dynamic publishing, which you talked about, which really is, at the end of the day, content on demand. So I'm going to take a little break and show you an example of multi-purpose documents. Okay, so if I go to, I'm going to open my browser here and show you where is it? There it is. Okay. This is a document that I downloaded from a public site, but which was created by style sheets that we developed. So if you see here, there's a PDF. We'll be coming back to this PDF later on. It has a home page, a front page. Okay. If I go down, there's a lot of different elements of this PDF. Okay. But it looks like a manual that probably you've seen before. Okay. Now, I can take this manual or something very similar to it, or similar content. I'm going to open it up in a help file. Okay. You should be seeing an HTML help file here, again, which is very similar content. Okay, but as I browse around, it looks different than the PDF. First of all, it's broken up into page by each topic. It's its own page. Okay, there's all kinds of links that are being created automatically. Parent topics for hierarchy, relationship links, etc. And it just looks different. It's made, the fonts and the colors and everything else are designed to look good on the web. Okay, and we're going to take the same or similar content, same customer, same company, and we're going to look at their content in EPUB. Okay, so this is the same content in EPUB format, which might be downloaded and viewed on a mobile device. Okay, as you see, it looks a little bit different, a little bit similar than the HTML, but there's a lot of when you start looking into details, a lot of little quirks. One of the things that are interesting about EPUBs, and when you're dealing with multiple formats, is things like table sizes, making sure that the tables are going to be able to fit on the screen. And if you have long tables, what to do about them. If you have a very wide table, how are you going to show that on a mobile device? And there are ways of dealing with that. For example, one way of dealing with that is to automatically turn that table into a sculpted list, for example. So you're seeing the information in a hierarchical type of way, like the columns and rows, but it's in a way that can fit onto a device. So there's all kinds of different strategies that are put into place to get the content to look proper, but the idea is that it's all coming from your base XML content. Okay, I'm going to show you another example here. The customer that, oops, put that to the screen. Okay, the customer that's producing PDFs. Should be seeing a reference guide, scrolling through it. Again, nothing, looks nice, but nothing too out of the ordinary. Okay. Now what I'm going to do is I'm going to view this same book or this content on a web interface. Not quite a help. It's a little bit nicer. Okay. So you should be seeing a knowledge base for the same company. It's called RadVision. Okay. In this interface, I can go and I can do searches. I can search based on product, based on version, based on solution, or I can navigate through their content set. I can navigate through their content set through the left on the navigation. So I can say I'm looking for a certain product, and then kind of navigate through different publications, and then view the content. Okay. So I go through the content, and I see that it looks very different than the PDF that I just showed you, but it's really the same content, just channeled to a much more high-level platform for searching and for viewing. Okay. So those are two examples of, at a high level, of taking DITA content and moving it to several different outputs. Okay. I'm going to pop back to the slides. Okay, so a little bit of background for those of you who are new to DITA. So when we talk about the behind the scenes or under the hood of how to get this, we're starting really with an XML instance or document, maybe XML files, and it might be media and graphic files, video maybe. Okay, you're working with a DTD. In this case, we're using DITA. You might have some specializations, and that DTD and the specializations are informing what's inside of your XML files, what kind of content, what kind of structure. Okay, what order the content is in. Then you have the presentation rules or the style sheets, which are made up of XSL maybe, XLFO. These are different types of styling formats. CSS, something new called Shakespearean templates. But the presentation rules are also guided or built on top of what the structure is of the DTD. So the DTD is the rule sheet also for what the documents need to have or need to be, how they're structured. And they're also informing what the style sheets need to be able to render. Okay, and then when we put all three of those together, we get the presentation. That might be a PDF, an HTML, EPUB, etc., like we spoke about before. Okay, on the bottom there, you'll see SVG. SVG, we'll talk about a little bit later. It's a graphic format. It's an XML-based graphic format. So a typical DITA toolset is, again, for those who are kind of new and coming to this, you have an XML authoring tool. That's where authors actually write the XML content. There's a number of them. There's XMetal, there's Oxygen, Arbor's, and EasyDITA has also its own authoring tool, which is very effective, browser-based. That content is stored inside of a CMS, such as EasyDITA. From the CMS, the author is able to push that magic button and then get out the formats that we spoke about. Generally, you're using the DITA Open Toolkit. There are other technologies, for example, DITA Accelerator, something that we use at Suite Solutions for some of our new formats. And that's publishing out to manuals, help, web help, mobile, etc. Now, there's other channel that's becoming more and more in use, which is the dynamic docs, which is using the more on-demand delivery systems. Okay. And along with that, we have the SME review, which is in the CMS, generally has a tool that's built in for doing review. Okay, and there also might be integrations with it between the CMS and other systems such as Salesforce or other enterprise systems. Okay, the magic button has an interface. So here's a sample interface based on EasyDITA, where if you were sitting in EasyDITA and you wanted to publish your output, you would get to a screen that looks something like this, where you would choose the output format on the left, or different configurations, okay, depending on how your system, which style sheets you have and what you've customized, you'd be able to add to that list. And then based on what you've added to your published list, you can set different locales for localization. You can set different parameters based on what your style sheets support, and we'll get into that a little bit later. Okay. Okay, now I'm going to talk a little bit about common requirements for PDF. We're going to kind of get into the nitty-gritty a little bit about what you really can do with these style sheets. So very often we hear from customers that say, okay, you know what, I have a document. Some of my documents I want to talk, a table of contents, and an index. Sometimes I don't want an index. Maybe I have a basic style sheet that's being used for a manual, which makes me multiple chapters, and I want to use the same style sheet for a smaller insert or a smaller publication. So sometimes I don't want the talk. I don't want the index, or maybe I don't want to jump a list, the mini talks. Customers will also often want to turn on and off draft comments. So in DITA, there's a way that you can type in comments to the author or to the reviewers. And sometimes if you're publishing a PDF for review, you want to see those draft comments. But obviously, if you're publishing for production, you do not want to see those comments, so that you would want to turn them off. Crop marks, again, if you're publishing for print, you want them on. If you're publishing for online, take them off. So you can take the same content, publish the same manual with crop marks, without crop marks. Watermarks, turning on the watermarks, turning them off, etc. Okay. Often customers also would ask for variable size documents. For example, if you're having a document that needs to be printed and delivered in the United States or North America, the printing is usually on letter size. If you're publishing for Europe, it's often printed on A4 size. And then there's all kinds of custom sizes. We call fitting it in the box. We have customers who are told by the packaging people, okay, you have X inches by Y inches in the box. You have X number of millimeters that has to fit in. Print out this thing and make sure it does not exceed those dimensions, and make sure it's not too thick. And oh, by the way, it needs to have 10 languages in there, because we're taking this thing in and shipping it to a number of different countries. So that becomes a challenge. But these are things that we've been able to do using some ingenuity, and again, pushing parameterization into the style sheet. Okay, and also those custom sizes means fitting with very exact spacing requirements, especially when that page is meant to be folded. Okay, so I'm going to show you an example here. A second. I'm going to show you an example of a manual. Again, I downloaded this manual. This is a manual from Garmin. It comes from their site. It actually happens to be Portuguese. Okay. If I'm looking at this manual online, it looks a certain size. I'm just kind of paging through this. I'm going to stop here. Okay, you see it's 2 columns. Okay. And the graphics are actually, you can't see them, but they're actually low res, right? They're not, this PDF was not created for print. Okay. But if I take the similar document, okay, you should be seeing another document on the screen now. This was generated for print. And so you see the crop marks. Okay. If I scroll through this, okay. I'll see a slightly different size and with the crop marks. We'll get to this a little bit later, but you'll notice this document is not only localized, but it's going to have multiple languages. So I have one language here. Okay. I go through, I see the table of contents in different languages. Okay. So this is an example of how you can take the same style sheet, same content, and publish it through in one way with crop marks for print, with high-res graphics, and the other way to publish the same way with another push of a button and upload it to the site. Okay. I'll go back to the slides. Okay. Another requirement that we very often hear is being able to have different page sizes and orientation for either a single topic or a single page or a single table or a figure, either in landscape or in different page sizes. So let's say, for example, you have a table that's very wide and you want that to print out in landscape view. Okay? Or let's say you have a particular topic that you want to publish that has maybe some information with very detailed procedures, and you want to be able to publish it landscape with some kind of graphic next to it. Or let's say you have a very large wiring diagram, and you want to publish that as a fold-out. Okay, so how do you do that? So it turns out that in DITA, you can specify things called output classes. We'll talk a little bit more about that later. And by using output classes on the topic or on the page or table or figure, then you can basically instruct the style sheet to publish that page in a different size and orientation. So I'm going to show you an example of that. It's a little bit small. Let's try with this a little bit. Okay, here's an example of a book. Okay. It is actually for an aircraft. And then when I have a graphic that's I'm using some sample content here, so it's not so big, but you can imagine that this was a wiring diagram, right? So you would want this published on a larger page. Okay. One thing I want to point out while we're kind of going through this, actually I'll stop here and get to use another example for that. Okay, another type of requirement we get is for watermarks. Okay, and watermarks can be produced in different ways. Sometimes a watermark might be static, and sometimes a watermark may be based on metadata or on the date. So I'll give you an example how that can be done. Okay, here we have an example. You should be seeing an example of a watermark where the watermark was created automatically based on metadata that's being pulled out of the book. Okay, concatenated with the date that the book is being published. Okay, so if you can imagine if you're taking a book and you want to push it out for review and you want to know exactly when this book was published, maybe what version it is, then that's something that you can teach your style sheets how to do. Okay. Okay, we actually have a whole webinar devoted to adding watermarks to your PDF. So if you're interested in such a thing, there's a YouTube video on our channel. When these slides are published, you'll be able to click on the link. Okay, another common requirement, and this is actually very common, is to customize the cover and the back pages of the PDF. Okay, so I'm going to show you some examples of that, kind of pick out some examples of how, oops, where's that example? Here it is. We saw this one before. Okay, so I'm going to open this up to the front page, and we're going to look at this carefully. You know, you guys, a lot of you guys I'm sure are technical writers, and you're looking at this and you're already seeing, you're already imagining, so what needs to change on this thing, okay? And how does this style sheet need to understand what needs to be positioned where, and where am I going to get that information from? Okay, so it turns out you can customize the cover sheet and the back pages and other information about the publication by using metadata, and then again teaching the style sheets what to do with that. So here we have a graphic, and this graphic might change depending on the product that I'm publishing this document for. Okay, I have the name of the document, the title, which is coming from the book map. That changes obviously. I have a publication date. I have a serial number. I have a revision number. Okay, the type of guide. Okay, all this is information that's being changed on the fly. Okay, and then the logos. Go to the second page, and the text down here is static information, right, that's being published, and sometimes this information changes. So, for example, the customer service information changes based on the locale, or it might be localized. Okay, so there's information here that changes and might be variable based on how this document is being published. I'm going to skip to the end of the document. Okay. Okay, we see, on the top, first of all, there's a barcode, which is generated automatically based on information coming from the metadata. We have, again, the serial number, again, the revision number and date. And then we have a series of addresses. Now, it turns out that these addresses are also variable. These are addresses that can be determined what needs to be there on the fly, depending on how this is being published. Okay, information down here is coming on the fly, and depending on how many addresses, it's basically pushing it up. So starting on the bottom left and pushing it up. So again, I'm pointing out these examples because I want to show you all the different types of options you have for getting high quality and very highly customized automated publishing based on the style sheets. Okay, so that's the front cover, back cover, which is again, this is requirements that generally take time to discover, and it goes along with the information architecture about which metadata needs to go into the book map or the map in order to be plucked out at the right time and placed into the actual PDF. Okay, I'm back to the slides now. Page breaks and keep with next. These are common requirements that we have for PDF, and this is actually something that tends to irritate people the most. Folks are used to tweaking manually those page breaks, and it's often done by people kind of, people like us, going through the document at the end, right before publishing, right before printing, and kind of using some kind of logic in order to decide how to break up the files, the pages. Okay, the complexity comes in DITA that you have elements that can span multiple pages. So I have a list, right, but a list in DITA is made up of one element, which has multiple elements inside. Okay, so it turns out that page breaks and keep with next rules are one of those things that seems like it would be easy to do, but it takes some thought, and it takes some programming inside the style sheets to build in that logic. It's something that if you invest a little bit in, you'll get some basic rules, and the more you invest in it, the better and better you get your automatic page breaking. But the idea is that the style sheets are approximating the logic and the thought process of a real person, you, basically, that would go in and add those manual page breaks so that they're done automatically. Okay? I'll give you an example. Some customers say, okay, I want to break, down to the point where if it's the third list bullet, the third item in the list, break, but only if there's no graphic before it. Okay? Or if there's a graphic after it, make sure that the graphic is on the same page. There's all kinds of different rules you can program in there. Table footnotes is something that sounds like one of those simple things, but something that needs some programming in. Appearing after the table instead of on the bottom of the page. Often, by default, if you put a footnote anywhere in a document, it'll go in the bottom. But for tables, you want them to be underneath the table. And that's something that's definitely possible, and we've done for a number of customers. Flagging. We have customers who use conditionalization, where they say, okay, certain topics or certain elements inside of topics, or certain graphics, or certain groupings of topics are relevant or should be included or excluded into the document based on conditional attributes in the DITA. Okay, and it's very often useful when you're doing a review to know what conditionalization is being placed on which element. Okay, so we can actually flag inside the PDF the conditional attributes you can see, and you can review to make sure that they're okay. The other way that we've seen customers use it is that they will publish a document for multiple configurations of their document. Okay, in which case they actually want the flagging to appear in the document for the customer. So I'm going to show you an example of that. Here we go. Okay, so if you look here, okay, so if you notice there's some sample content we just put together. Okay, They're actually used by the developers. But these tags you see here, A, B, C, and D, these are actually codes that are mapped to the conditional attributes. So for example, this customer can say, okay, if the configuration is, 1,000, 2,000, or 3,000, map it to A. And if it's 4, 5, or 6,000, map it to B. Okay, so depending on different elements, how they mark up their content, they can say, okay, certain products have a certain configuration, and that configuration is bundled under B. So whenever you have an element for any number of or combination of products, I don't want to put the list of products in there that this is relevant for. I just want to put some kind of configuration number. Okay. So again, this is an example in real life how you would use conditionalization tagging for production. Okay. Another thing that folks often find very useful is change tracking. Now, change tracking can be done. Here, you should be seeing the full screen. Change tracking can be done via the authoring tool. So, for example, if you're using XMetal or Oxygen or something like that, you can turn on change tracking, and those tools will insert markup or codes inside your XML files. Okay, we want the PDF, the style sheets, to pick that up and then show the change tracking. If you're using a review tool such as DITA, then DITA also pushes codes inside of the content in order to be published, okay, into the PDF or to the HTML. And sometimes you'll want to compare between two different document revisions. So we've had customers where they say, you know what, we have a revision of a document going out to a customer, and then we have the next revision going out. And we want to be able to compare between those two document revisions that we've saved off as a snapshot in our CMS and give them a version of the document that has change bars. So they can say, okay, I can see exactly what changed between these two documents. Okay, or to create automatically a list of changes, a change list, or something called the list of effective pages, which we'll see later on, which is often used in the aerospace industry and some other industries as well. Okay, or sometimes you might want to, you're using the same document for a number of different customers, and you want to be able to give them, a particular customer, a document of how the document looked now as compared to the document that they received, which may be several snapshots or several revisions ago. Okay, so this change tracking and comparison tool becomes very, very, very useful. So I'm going to show you an example of that. It's going to be a simple example, then we'll see a more detailed example a little bit later on. Okay, so here's a simple example. So, so you'll see where text was added or deleted. Okay, or graphics as well. See graphics that are, let me put out by the graphic. I'm seeing one, but you can actually see the graphics that are X'd out if they've been if it's been deleted. Here we go. So here's an example of an image that was deleted and an image that was added. Okay. So this is an example of how you might see change bars, and you can also have change bars on the side, either on the left side or the right side, or have the change bars switch sides if you're publishing, if you're using odd even pages. Okay. Back to the slides. Okay, we're going to talk a little bit about graphics. We talked about printing or producing PDFs for print as opposed to printing or producing them for online viewing. Generally, that manifests itself about what graphics are being used to publish. So if you're publishing for high resolution or high fidelity publications or PDFs for print, often you will use an EPS. Okay, EPSs are supported in the file sheets by Antenna House, which is a rendering engine, XSLFO rendering engine, plus something called GhostScript. So if you have a tool chain which in your style sheets are using Antenna House and GhostScript, then you can use EPSs. Now the question comes that when you want to publish, you want to use that EPS, okay, but when you publish for HTML or for low resolution output for online, you want to automatically take that EPS and convert it to something lighter, like a PNG. Okay, and that's something that can be done in the style sheets on the fly. So depending on how you choose, what parameter or how you choose to output during runtime, when you push that easy magic button, then the style sheets will automatically run a process that converts those EPSs using something like ImageMagick, for example, on the fly on the server into PNG. So you're basically using one source EPS, and you're getting multiple formats, even in the graphics. SVG, which we mentioned before, is an XML format, which means the graphic itself is XML. And it turns out that since the text inside the graphic is XML and text, it becomes easier to localize. So if you have, let's say you have an image with callouts, okay, and those callouts are actual text, you can take that SVG file and send it to your translator, and the translator will translate the XML. They won't need to redesign that graphic. Okay. Now there's some caveats about this when you talk about doing localization, that you have to make sure that you're leaving enough room in the callout that if the word is going to be translated to something relatively verbose like German or something, that there's going to be enough space. It's not going to run off the page. But there's some other things. But basically, SVG is becoming more and more in use in the industry. Okay, we're going to talk a little bit about SVGs a little later on. We're going to look at a very interesting use case. And also embedding links to videos. We're getting more and more requests to be able to embed links to videos inside PDF files, as well as HTML. Okay, let's talk about some other interesting requirements, in case your head isn't spinning already. So let's talk about some of the cool stuff. So barcodes and QR codes, especially QR codes, are becoming more and more in vogue. Those can be generated automatically using an antenna house extension, again, using style sheets. Section 503 compliance, that's for people with disabilities. That often comes into play when you're publishing to HTML. Okay, so for example, making sure that all of your HTML tags or your images have alt titles and things like this. But it also becomes relevant in PDF because PDFs can be read using screen readers like JAWS, J-A-W-S. And what's done is that we can use the style sheets to load the PDF with special attributes that the screen readers can pick up based on the elements that are the DITA elements. So for example, let's say you're using it, and this is a simple example. Let's say you have an element that's a link, okay? So the screen reader will present that or read that to the user and tell them it's a link. Okay, or an image, they'll tell them that there's an image there. But you can do a lot of other things. If there's procedures or there's certain types of headings, you can already put special attributes in there into the PDF so that the screen, and kind of as a prompting mechanism for the screen reader. Okay, we're getting more and more requirements for that. Showing tags for output for review. Okay, that's something that's really kind of cool. Let's say you're doing a review of your content and you want to see which DITA tags, when you print out the PDF, you want to see which DITA tags are being used in order to, for reviewing, or maybe you're seeing some quirky things and you want to see what tagging is being used. Let me show you an example of that. Here we go. So you should see on the screen, example where we're actually putting the tags inside the PDF. Okay, it becomes kind of useful. It often sometimes becomes useful when you're doing reviewing translated localized PDF. Sometimes, believe it or not, sometimes the XML comes back from the localization vendor a little bit less than perfect, and when you print that out, you'll kind of see some weird things because the translator accidentally screwed up deleted an attribute, or they messed up one of the tags. So running a style sheet like this is very often useful to kind of see if there's anything messed up with the coding, and then you can go ahead and fix it. Back to the slides. Okay, another kind of cool thing that we've done is links between documents. Let's say you're using DITA for learning and training content, and you want to reuse your content for producing an instructor manual and a participant manual. Okay? Now, often you can imagine there's a teacher in the classroom, and the participants have a workbook in front of them, and the instructor wants to tell them, the instructor book is generally a little bit different than the participant book. It has maybe some information in there, some hints or notes about what to tell the participants. So often it will be useful for the instructor to tell the participants, okay, turn to page 50, whereas on the instructor, in their guidelines, it might be on page 55. Okay, so we've been able to create the style sheets that when you print out two separate PDF files, okay, which are slightly different because they have slightly different text based on conditionalization or whatnot, then the links are made, and those cross-references and page references are actually made to be able to go back and forth. Okay, so that's another very nice application of how you can program smarts into your style sheet. This is actually a good example of what is very, very difficult to do by hand if you're using FrameMaker or InDesign or something like that for your, or Word for your different documents. Okay. Another requirement that we're hearing more and more for is MathML. MathML is an XML standard that you can use to kind of put inside of your DITA content to model and render equations. Okay, so again, you can program your PDFs using an antenna house extension to publish those equations that were modeled in MathML. Okay, you can also render that MathML, those equations, into HTML by automatically generating graphics. Okay, so on the fly, the style sheets pick out that MathML and publish them into graphics so that you can view them inside of a browser. Now, browsers these days are more and more big. Some of them are or especially the later versions of some browsers are supporting MathML natively. The problem with that is that if you know that your users are going to be using one certain type of browser, then that's fine. But if you want your content to be used by a multitude of users on many different devices, and you don't know what browser they might be using, until all the browsers support MathML natively, then we generally recommend not to rely on that and to render those into graphics. Again, all this is done automatically on the fly. We have a webinar on our YouTube channel. Actually, we have two webinars. One is more basic, one and one more detailed about how to implement MathML. You can look on our YouTube channel for that. So now that we've talked about all these cool things you can do in the style sheet, okay, the question is, how do people use it? Okay, so just like we have we have user manuals for our products, so it's useful to have documentation about the style sheets. Okay, the output classes that you're using, the parameters, and how metadata is being used. So I'm going to show you an example of a style sheet manual that we developed for one of our customers in particular. Okay, should be seeing that on the screen. So the manual is broken into a few different sections, but for example, here we have a list of output classes and what they do. So, for example, if someone is using is creating a topic that's going to be used for the front cover, okay, or for the back of the front cover, okay, so and you use certain output classes, then you can tell how to present that graphic, okay, or which graphic is supposed to be in the front, which one is supposed to be in the bottom. Okay, that's an example. If you have, I'm going to go down. If you have different types of notes, okay, how you want to pluralize the notes, whether you want to have note or notes. Some people like it to be done certain ways. If you want to manually put in a page break, okay, so if you have you want to manually meaning put a page break, put into the DITA that whenever this element is encountered, that a page break should be generated automatically, every time. So you can program that into the DITA, which gets picked up by the style sheet. Okay, some other examples down here. We talked before about if you have topics or images or tables, if you want them to be landscape or certain sizes, right? Then you would also use that for use output classes for that. Okay. I'm going to go down a little bit. Here's a list of parameters that the style sheet supports. So, for example, we talked about whether you want to have an index, yes or no. Okay, whether or not to produce a title page. Sometimes if it's a small manual or a few pages, you don't need a title page. Okay, if you want the notes and the warnings to be displayed in color or in black and white, whether you want section numbering or not. Certain manuals may be longer and you want section numbering. Certain manuals may be shorter, and if maybe one chapter, you don't need section numbering. how many levels you want in the talk. Okay, so there's a lot of different examples, some of them which we spoke about before, about how you can parameterize those style sheets, and how that information should be documented so that the authors, when they're putting information into their DITA, they'll know exactly how to guide their style sheets. Okay. There's another example about instructions about how to model the front cover. Okay, and about exactly which elements, which metadata is used inside the book maps to and how they are shown up, how they display on different places on the cover, the front cover or the back cover. Okay. So that's documentation. I hope you agree with me that documentation is important in general. Okay, considerations for localization. Okay, when we talk about localization, localization is generally supported with the DITA Open Toolkit, but there are some things that we'll talk about soon that need to be customized. Multilingual documents, meaning one document that has more than one language in the same PDF, is generally not supported out of the box with a toolkit, but it can be done, which you've seen obviously because I've showed you. I'll show you some more examples of that soon. When the style sheets are designed right, then you have one style sheet for all the languages. You do not need to have one style sheet for each language. If anyone tells you need them, then they're wrong. Okay, you should be able to get everything into one language. Font usage. Okay, different fonts are used for different languages. The formatting, I'm going to run through this because we're kind of running out of time. The formatting, some languages don't have bolds or italics, but they use other types of text or to set apart or emphasize the text. For example, in Japanese, they use these brackets often. Chinese, you often use these types of things, these brackets. Variable strings, text that is static throughout the content. Generally, the DITA toolkit has those already translated, but other text like copyright, addresses, special headings, those things need to be added into your variable string inside the style sheets. Another interesting thing is that sort, index, and glossary sort. Chinese and Japanese don't sort alphabetically. They sort based on, or at least for Chinese, for example, sorts based on how many strokes there are in the character. I think I got that right. In any case, it's very hard to do automatically. So what a lot of folks do is they have to do it by hand using index sort as links, or elements inside the DITA. Antenna House has a module which you can purchase and implement in your style sheets, which actually automates the index glossary sort for Chinese. Okay, so that's kind of cool. Okay, pushing the envelope. Some more advanced use cases. I want to show you a list of effective pages. That's a kind of a high-level change showing how things have changed in the document. So let me show that to you. That's in this document here. Okay, so you see here something called list of effective pages. Let me make it a little bit bigger. Okay, so this is for an aircraft manual. Okay, but what's cool here is that automatically what the style sheets do is it went through and it was able to find which revision of the document each page was changed. So if you have a change on page 2, okay, that was made in the second revision or the second change number for the document, right? It'll tell you which change. If nothing changed on page on page 2, except for something in change 3, right? So you'll see that. So right now everything is change 0 because this is sample content. I didn't actually compare it to any other revisions, but you can get the idea how you can use the style sheets to create a range from page 1 to 8. Everything is change 0. Okay, 1 through 3, maybe there's the content there that actually changes and changes 1. Okay, page 2, 4 is actually blank. There's nothing on there. Okay, here's another example of automatically the style sheets. If you're doing odd even pages, right, the style sheets can automatically add a blank page based on the printing rules. I'm not going to get into that because it can make your head spin. But the idea is that not only can the style sheets add blank pages and figure out what's on each page and figure out what's changed on each page, but can also make it automatically compile a list like this based on this kind of numbering of showing the ranges of what, at a high level, someone can look at this list and see what changes have been made in the document.
Hey, Joe. This is Steve. It kind of brings up one of the questions that we've had
And people, if you do want to, you can type a question into the Q&A panel or just into the chat. So, we did have a question from Frank here that he's kind of loving what he sees, but also is asking if we could get some idea of what the cost would be of some of these customizations that you're talking about. And he had specifically wondered about integration with Salesforce knowledge base.
Yeah, so that's a big question. Some of these things are things we've done before, so we can kind of plug and play the code, and it's relatively inexpensive. If you have something that needs to be highly customized and you have a lot of different business rules, they can obviously be more expensive. When publishing to Salesforce, it's generally relatively straightforward, meaning Salesforce, first of all, there's a few different types of Salesforce. There's desk.com and some other things, depending whether you're importing to DITA or exporting from DITA into Salesforce or out of Salesforce. But generally, again, it generally is not going to break the bank, because a lot of things, for example, we've done before, so we know how to do them, and we can apply those things to you. But the higher level of customization that you need, obviously, the more work that has to go into it. As I mentioned before, some things seem very hard, but are actually not so hard to do in reality, and some things are the opposite. For example, MathML is something that it took us a long time to get out of work, but now it takes us an hour or two to plug it into a style sheet. Okay, landscape pages or something, it took us weeks, to learn how to do the first time, but now we've got it down to a science, and we can do it in a few hours, depending on what your output classes are. So again, it really depends on the particular requirements. I know that's probably.
Hey, Joe, this is Patrick here.
Hi, Patrick.
So I wanted to jump in on the MathML thing there real quick too. So not only is publishing MathML a challenge, but authoring it is as well. So one of the great things that's come out of this is that you guys have expertise on creating the output of MathML, and EasyDid has actually got an integrated MathML editor. So if anybody out there is looking for an end-to-end solution to produce MathML, between Suite Solutions and EasyDid, we have the ability to really help you out. And actually, I had a quick question for you, for I think everyone before we got a couple minutes left. So, people who are going to be coming to you and looking to, get some of their output stylized, what are the types of things that you'd want them to prepare and have in hand before they came to you, so they could, reduce the amount of time to get to their goal as much as possible?
Yeah, it's a great question. I'll answer this, and I want to get to a couple more things before we stop. So generally, we have a checklist that we generally work through with our customers, which kind of follows in a certain way what we've seen today. Do you want X? Do you want Y? Do you want this? How many levels of talk do you want? Okay, so we have a checklist, and we kind of lead people through and then we're able to branch down and branch out and drill down to specific requirements. Okay. Often the requirements we can glean from existing documents. So if you have a document that already exists, we can look at the front cover and the back cover and say, okay, so this is the kind of metadata we see. Let's now, pick each one, formalize it, write it down, figure out what metadata is going to be there, figuring all the different permutations and combinations. So that's basically, how we, using our experience and using our templates, for requirements, kind of help guide the process through a detailed requirements. Okay, a couple of things I want to show really quickly before we stop. Here's an example of a multilingual foldout. Okay, I mentioned these before. This I downloaded from a public site. But as a customer of ours, and we developed these style sheets. So if you can see, actually, there's a lot of different languages on here. There's some of the languages are going down, some of them are going up, because this is meant to be folded. Okay, and you have graphics here. Okay, a lot of different cool stuff, a lot of different stuff going on here. I want to show you here a similar thing. This is in Japanese and Chinese, okay, and Far Eastern languages. Okay, and one other one. Not that one. Okay, I'm going to skip it. The other thing I want to show you is something a little bit interesting, and I'll do this very quickly. We're talking about SVGs. SVGs is, we said, is text, and we had use cases where the graphic needed to change based on how it was being published, the serial number that was in the metadata. So we're actually able to just change the SVG right, based on the metadata being coming out during publish time. Okay, but there's the catch is that in the book, right, there's a bunch of icons, and the icons need to run on the back cover from the bottom right to left, which is opposite how you usually would think of how things run. So to get that to work, we basically had to publish the thing upside down, okay, and then so it could flow from top to bottom, left to right. But then all the graphics were upside down also. So we had to basically create a graphic that was upside down and then produce this text upside down also. So if you see in this SVG, right, the text is actually rotated 180 degrees. And during publish time, all the graphics are generated on the fly. It looks something like this you see on the screen. Okay, and that's pushed right into the style sheet and published. This was actually done for Garmin. It was one of the examples we saw before. Okay, this is an example of how, again, I'm finishing up. This is an example of how you can, we're talking about online help, how you can change how the help looks based on, or rebrand it based on metadata. So based on your metadata, the help could look like this, or it could look like this, okay, based on the branding. Okay, this is actually done for one of our customers using something called SuiteHelp, which is a web help interface. Okay, we're kind of running out of time, so I can't show you too much about dynamic publishing. Maybe we can do that at a different time.
Yeah, let's schedule another one for that. Joe,
okay.
Thank you so much for this.
Okay, thank you very much.
And,
thank you very much for everyone for participating, and thank you for hosting. We have some webinars coming up with DITA, and we have another part of our DITA Quick Start program. So if you talking about requirements building, we're going to be talking about building style sheet requirements, building translation requirements, how to build a project plan for migrating to DITA, etc. So we hope you'll join us for those.
Yeah, and Joe, I did want to say there will be a recording available of this if you want to, pass that along, some of this good information to somebody else in your organization, or just raise awareness of what's possible with dynamic publishing. And I did want to leave you with just a plug for our next DITA Rockstar webinar coming up in 3 weeks from now, on the 2nd of October with Don Day. And Don's very active in the determining the OASIS standard for DITA, and has got some exciting things to talk to us about the future of DITA on the web. So again, thanks, Joe, for doing this, and everybody enjoy the rest of your day. Thanks so much for attending.
Thank you. Bye-bye.
Bye-bye.